Are we ready? I'd like to reopen the May 23rd Shelburne Selectboard meeting. Item now is to consider approval of the agenda. I'd like to add an item for executive session to consider entering executive session to discuss ongoing litigation involving the Shelburne shipyard and invite the town manager, if everyone is good with that. Okay?
And sorry, you can delete number 19.
And delete number 19, which is not ready.
Move to approve as amended.
Moved by Colleen,
I'll second.
seconded by John. Any discussion? Hearing none. We're getting some feedback, by the way. All in favor? Aye. Great. Next item up is consider approving Select Board minutes of May 9th, 2017. Does anyone have any proposed changes? Hearing none. Someone like to move to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Colleen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. All right. Those are approved. Next item, item number 5 is public comments. This is the time during our agenda. If anyone here has any comment about anything over which this board has jurisdiction that is not on tonight's agenda, we welcome hearing from you. Roz, you got anything? Nothing? Want to sing a song?
No, you'd be really sorry.
Anyone? Okay. Time for select board comments. Let's start in the middle. Jerry, why don't you go first?
I don't have any.
John,
I'm all set, thanks.
Colleen,
I'm good.
Josh.
And I am.
Clean sweep. Nothing from me. Town managers report.
All right, I want to make this quick because I want to get on to the next agenda item, which is certainly much more important. But I do want to tell the select board and the public that I think it was last Monday, I had the good fortune of hosting 6 visitors from Afghanistan. Each of them were local, provincial leaders in Afghanistan that came here on a program through the U.S. State Department through the Vermont Council of World Affairs. I had the good fortune of meeting with them for an hour. They were interested in how local government works in Vermont in particular, besides Vermont. They met with me. I think they met with VLCT. They also were in Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Virginia. After they left here, they went to Florida and Arizona, so they're getting quite the tour. It was definitely an honor to host them, and I'm looking forward to continuing my friendship with them as time goes on. So I wanted to let the board know that, and the public know that Shelburne is, I guess, fortunate to be able to play an ambassador role in this regard.
Well, we belong right up there with Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
There's no question. All right. Anything else, Joe?
That's it.
All right. Our next item is one of those items that is a pleasure for everyone on this board. I'm guessing I speak for here. What do you say about a man who's given 50 years of service to our town, to the community we love? What do you say about a man who has saved this town millions and millions of dollars, meaning our property taxes are lower because of the work he does? What do you say about a man who easily does the work of 3 people? I say thank you. And so tonight, we would like to recognize our Highway Superintendent, Paul Goodridge, for 50 years of service to the town we love. Thank you, Paul. So Paul's entire family is dedicated to this town. It's an incredible family. The service of this family is such that his wife, who's head of rescue, isn't even here tonight because she has a meeting. His son, John, from the fire department, is here. His brother's involved in the town. I can tell you that Paul Goodridge goes to sleep during the winter. I'm not making this up. In his clothes. So if there's an emergency call, he can jump right into his vehicle to address it. I don't make this up. You can't make this stuff up. I've been told that Paul drives every road in Shelburne every day. It's unbelievable. So I'm going to turn it over. Paul did start with us. I think it was June 1st, 1967, and you're going to like this. The Red Sox won the pennant that year. They lost the series to the Cardinals. Jim Lohnberg had a great year that year and then broke his leg skiing. In any event, I'm going to turn this over to town manager.
So real quick, and then there's some gifts that we have to give Paul, but one of the reasons that Paul's wife may have decided to stay away is that, you can cue this, Peter, that we actually have a photo.
Can you turn off that one light behind you,
This
Jake,
is
please?
this is
Just
Paul's
one of them.
first day on the job was
The other one. Yeah,
June
thank you.
1st, 1967, and the back date of this photograph is 1967. So this was Paul Goodridge when he first started with Shelburne. He was a member of the fire department since at least I was going back over town reports today in the vault, since at least 66 or 65. So before he started in the highway department, he was on the fire department, and he became foreman in 1979. Shelburne's population at the time was below 2,000. The road commissioner's budget in 1967 was $80,000. Today it's $1.5 million. Lyndon Johnson was president. There's been 10 presidents since then. The highway mileage for Shelburne in 1967 was 15.28. Today it's 52.45. So the #1 Billboard song in America was Aretha Franklin's Respect when Paul started. And the #1 movie in the theater in June 1967 was John Wayne and Kirk Douglas in The War Wagon. So there's some fun facts. And we got a few more pictures that Linda brought to us today of that. And I think the next one, Peter and I effectively titled, "This is what happens when the road budget is cut."
I like all the scaffolding there for OSHA requirements.
Back then, you don't have to worry about
OSHA,
VOSHA
yeah.
requirements.
You know we had a cold.
Yeah, here's another one of Paul. I've seen some of these with Paul, and I said, Paul, those are some, pretty big muscles you had. Those are looking pretty sharp.
You still got big muscles.
I think and then maybe there's another photo from earlier on. That's it. So we found a few photos that Linda brought to us, but I've only had the pleasure of working with Paul for 3 of his 50 years, and we're obviously from 2 different generations and different time, but we've just always had a great relationship, and I really appreciate working with Paul every day.
We have a couple of things that we'd like to present to Paul. It's not a pack of cigarettes, sorry, Paul. When did you give up cigarette smoking?
About 30 years ago.
This is from the town, from the Select Board for 50 years of service to the town of Shelburne. Dear Paul, it is our pleasure to recognize your 50th employment anniversary with the town of Shelburne. Because of your commitment to the people of this community, our roads have been maintained with unparalleled excellence, dedication, and care. The quality of Shelburne's roads reflect the high standards you have set for yourself and your department. We also commend you for managing the budget with a high level of skill. Shelburne is your hometown. You helped make it a special place for all of us, and we are all privileged to call home. The best part of this celebration is that we know your contributions to the town will continue for years to come. Thank you for your service to Shelburne, and we have a gift for you and Linda to go to Shelburne Farms for a brunch on the town. There's more. Here you go. Thank you. And there's more. From the office of the governor. Dear Paul, and we have for you, with this from the governor, Paul, this is the flag that flew over our state capitol. From Governor Scott, I am honored to present you with this flag to thank you for your service and sacrifice in the Vietnam War. It is my privilege to share this with you to represent your role in protecting Vermont and our country. Your patriotism and courage embodies the Vermont spirit. I would also like to thank you for your 50 years of service to the community of Shelburne as road commissioner. Your hard work and dedication is valued by those you serve and by me. Thank you again for all you do to improve the lives of Vermonters. Sincerely, Governor Phil Scott.
And there's more.
And we have another one. This is a certificate from the Capitol Police Department at the Vermont State House. This is to certify that this United States flag, identified by inscription VT and a bunch of numbers on its border, was flown at the Vermont State Capitol in Montpelier, Vermont on May 16th, 2017, in honor of Paul Goodridge, in thanks for his years of service to our country in the armed services and his Vermont community. Signed, Dale Manning, Officer of Vermont Capitol Police. Paul Goodridge, ladies and gentlemen. Paul. You want to say something, Paul?
No.
Thanks for everything, that's all.
All right, it's going to be hard to follow that one up. So next, one of the things this board started 3 years ago, this is now our 4th year, is we're trying to foster dialogue between all our boards, so each of our boards work together better, more civilly, and to exchange ideas and to help the town of Shelburne. So one of the things we started was to have committee reports, so we can speak directly to all the committees in town. So tonight is our Development Review Board, and we have here with us the chair of our Development Review Board, Mary Keogh, as well as staff member Caitlin Mitchell. Please come up to the microphone and talk to us.
Well, as you know, I'm Mary Kehoe. It's my privilege to serve as chair of the Development Review Board with the able help of Caitlin Mitchell. We have, in my opinion, probably, I'm going to go so far as to say one of the most diverse boards in the town and probably in the county. And everybody's extremely dedicated to what they do, which is pleasure. Makes being on the board actually very rewarding, and I hope my colleagues on the board feel the same way. We did file a report, which you should have in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about it. I can tell you that I think this year was a bit of a watershed year for the board insofar as we are now have on the record review. And that was passed by, as you know, the Select Board, and we began following that about a year ago. We've had 2 contested hearings using this new formula, the on-the-record review. And I would say that the jury is still out. If the purpose in enacting these rules was a cost-saving measure and an efficiency measure, I don't think we can make that judgment yet, having only had 2 fairly contested hearings. Of those hearings, one went on, I think, probably a little bit longer than ordinarily would be the case, but it was our first on-the-record review case with lawyers on each side involving a very popular issue or a well-known issue. I'm pleased and proud to say that we issued a ruling that was not appealed, And in thinking about it coming here today, my thought on that is that that probably did save the town money, even though the hearing itself was long, because there still would have been a hearing at this level and then possibly an appeal. And so I guess I'm indulging myself a little bit to think that that may have been a cost saver for the town. And then the other one was appealed. That involved the Shelburne shipyard, so that's up on appeal right now. The part where I feel like the jury is still out is not only whether it's a cost-saving measure for the town, but whether it is workable. And the reason I say that is I think to follow the rules of evidence is a difficult chore, even for a licensed attorney such as myself. I think we're lucky that we have another attorney on the board, and we also have, in my opinion, extremely bright people on the board. So even if there were someone sitting in the chair's seat who wasn't familiar with Vermont's rules of evidence, I think they could probably do a pretty good job. That said, I think it's a tall order for a volunteer board to fill, honestly. But I think we should give it a little bit more time to see how things go so we can collect more data and get a better sense of how that is working. I'm probably, normally when I'm standing at a forum like this, there's a red light that tells me when to shut up, so you don't have that, so I'll keep going.
Kind of like home for me.
We're excited about form-based zoning, which was also put in place within the last year or so. We've had one form-based zoning application, which was somewhat confusing and alarming for people, but I think as time goes by, people will utilize it more, and I think it's a really, it has the potential for being a great asset for the town. So that's where we're coming from. We just really are very lucky to have a great constellation of people, probably in Shelburne in general, but on the board as well. That makes it a pleasure to serve. I do think, particularly if we're going to continue with on-the-record review, we should have better audio-visual equipment. The reason for that is sometimes people, if you have on-the-record review, you have to have all your witnesses available, and for that to be a cost-saving measure, we have to have these witnesses be available by telephone or some other audio device. The last time that happened, we were using my iPhone. So I'm not sure that's the way we really want to go. Also, since we have to be televised and so people can watch us, it's really difficult to see when people put stuff on the board. A lot of people still come with foam core, which is great and fine. But to be able to see that, I understand on the television is very difficult. So if we had some better means for that, and I realized there was some study done and the whole thing was quite expensive. So I understand there's limits, but that would be our request if we were invited to make one.
I could tell you that we did talk about technology, and frankly, the technology would be used by more than just your board.
Right, I understand
Because there are
that.
other boards that would use it, but your board, being the primary quasi-judicial board in town, would be the primary user of it. It comes down to money.
Yeah.
We've heard lately that the police department, they're thinking we need a full-time officer at Shelburne Community School, one over at CVU. We need an IT person for the police department. We have a
Well,
library tonight. There's a lot of
Yeah.
competing.
No, I understand
and-
where we stand, and it's certainly not to be registered as a complaint in
Right.
any way.
We understand.
I
We agree.
understand
I think everyone agrees with you. The technology would be great.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to Caitlin Mitchell. She really does a fine job. And I don't know how she was vetted and hired. I'm so glad that we kept her, because there was this one time when she said, "I need to talk to you," and I went, "Oh, shit." And now we know that I think I was probably one of the happiest person to know that her partner got into medical school and that she was no longer going to be. Is that public knowledge?
So people know Caitlin was here full-time. She continued working full-time, but remotely for, I believe, 2.5, 3 days a week. And now she's back full-time because of that good news that Mary
Right.
just
Our
mentioned.
gamble paid off.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
I
exactly.
give a shout out not only to Caitlin, but to Joe and Ann Janda, who came up with this idea to make it possible, and a thank you
great.
to Ann, because it's okay to say
Right.
this, right? Ann opened her home for the times that Caitlin would come back to, so she could stay with Ann, which was, it's an amazing thing to do for a friend and for the town,
Right,
so.
right, and we really
Thank you.
appreciate it a lot, so thank you. So if there are no
You
questions.
mentioned that you liked the diversity on the board, and can you talk about what you mean by the diversity on the board? Because to me, one of the biggest diverse issues for the DRB and the Planning Commission is geographic diversity within the town.
Oh, I don't know where people live per se. What I'm talking about is people's backgrounds. So we have a landscape architect, we have actually 3 lawyers if you count our new alternate. And we have, how do you describe what Mark does? He's an estimator for,
Construction manager.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so he fully understands a lot of the issues that come in front of us. And then we
Great
have,
practical
you know,
knowledge.
so we have that. There's cultural diversity, men, women, you know, it's just very diverse with a lot of different backgrounds. But there's this thing called random group dynamics. Have you ever heard of that? We have, randomly and luckily, great group dynamics. And so it's makes it, I think, a pleasure for all of us. I hope I speak correctly for the rest of the members of the board. So they're dedicated, they show up. You know, there's no pay, it's all volunteer. Sometimes it's hard work because the hearings go to about 10 o'clock at night at times. Lately, we've been doing pretty well with that. And there's a lot of materials to read and understand. And everybody's very inquisitive, and that's good. No one's shy about asking questions, so.
I would like to talk to you a bit about on-the-record review, but let me open it up to everybody on the board. Do you guys have any comments or questions for Mary?
I just have one question.
Please,
if
Jeff.
I could. Mary, I saw there was, not applicable response to the economic development question that was on the list, if you will.
Right.
It's number 6.
So as a quasi-judicial group, I don't think that we should be taking any stand whatsoever on economic development. I think we need to be neutral and impartial. So if we were to take a stand on economic development, that could impact people's perception on how we might rule on a particular project. So,
I think John was trying to bring that out and was thankful that, frankly, that was your answer. I'm thankful it was your answer. By the way, the form is just sent out to every committee, so it's not like this was just for the DRB.
Right.
It's to everybody.
right, we understood that to be the case.
I hope that would be the reason. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't something else
Right.
there. But I agree
Thank you for the
completely,
question.
and, yeah,
Right.
thank you for answering.
On the record review, just so people know, it is, we're one of the few communities in Vermont that has on the record review, and it was not a select board idea. It was the previous chair of the DRB
Oh.
who approached me to suggest that we go to on the record review. And it just turned out that the first case that came along was probably the most difficult case of the last 5 or 6 years in town. And so it did last a long time, and there were questions of, as you said, well-known place. It involved Harbor Place in Champlain Housing Trust. And you were right, it wasn't appealed, which was a decision that the Select Board made for various reasons. But I thank you for, myself, I thank your entire board for all the work you do. I thank you for your welcoming of student members on
Yeah,
your
we'd
board.
like to continue to do that. It was a very, I think it was bilaterally profitable
It was,
for everybody.
so, anyway, other questions or comments? I also want to thank your board, because one of the, I think, greatest benefits had happen in Shelburne by these dialogues is the work that's taken place between your board, the DRB, and the
Oh.
Planning Commission.
Yep.
What they've done is, the DRB has written down, keeps a, if I'm correct, a running list of issues that come before them that they think could be better explained and addressed in the bylaws to make it uniform application across the board. And so that gets sent to the Planning Commission, and I think you guys even have a planned meeting coming up
Yep.
sometime soon
Yep,
to
we-
talk about
yeah.
these things.
Yep.
So I really commend you guys for
Thank you.
for that.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mary.
Thanks for the chance. Bye.
All right, our next agenda item is presentation from the Wetlands consultant regarding the village dog park. And do we have, where's Dory?
She's here.
Dory's in the back. There she is. I would like to say that Dory Barton has worked in conjunction with the town for a while, and she is a consummate professional. She knows her job very well, and she presents herself professionally and with great kindness. It's a pleasure having you work with our town.
Good to see you again. Thank you for asking me to get involved with your dog park situation. Hi, Ann. Good to see you, indeed. I provided a memo. Did you all have a chance to take a look at that?
I did.
So I was asked to go out and take a look at the area where the dog park is located, specifically related to wetlands and concerns that came up from the Wetlands office from Tina Heath. So I went out and did a site visit with Ann and with Dean on the 11th, I believe it was, of May. We walked the area, and it was my opinion, based on review, that Tina Heath was correct in her memo in that the site is either wetland or buffer. There's not really much else there. It's surrounded by wetland. And so her evaluation of impacts is pretty accurate in terms of, fill that was brought in for the park. And my recommendation at the time was that we not do a formal delineation. I thought that was an unnecessary expense for the town. In all honesty, it's not really going to give you much. It doesn't change the situation that you're in, which is essentially that you have either wetland or buffer impacts, and they're both regulated through the wetland rules. The history of the project, or the history of the dog park, the Wetlands Office has clarified their opinion about whether that's permittable or not. And their decision that it's not is not inconsistent with decisions they've made elsewhere. So my recommendation was essentially to move ahead with identifying probably another location for the dog park, and work with the state, who I believe has still not issued a formal notice of violation, which I think is a good place for you all to be in, because where I've seen that with other clients is that means they're going to work with you. And that's suggested in the email as well, as far as a timeline that you could propose for making changes, and not being told that you have 2 weeks to move everything, and this is what we want, and you're going to hire consultants. So I do believe that the town is still in a good position to rectify the situation, and I'm happy to work with you to keep your expenses down. That's why I made the recommendation that I did. I don't think you need to go crazy on restoration plans. I don't think the state's asking for that, where you choose to go. I think that the restoration is very straightforward. As I indicated in my memo, I think there are 2 points that I think I would maybe push for additional flexibility if I were you. One had to do with the plantings that Tina recommended. I'm happy to talk to her for you if that's what you'd like, because I really don't think that the plantings are going to be successful. The site is surrounded by invasive species. Your plantings are going to be a little island. They're going to get overcome. I think that the benefit, or I think that, how shall I say this? A great thing that didn't happen there is that you didn't cut the trees down. And so there's a lot of native vegetation overstory that's there. What she was suggesting was bringing in an understory, which just unfortunately, given the location, unless you did a full-scale eradication of of a lot of property around it, I just don't, I don't see the benefit. So I would push back a little bit on that, and see, if we can get some kind of flexibility from them about that. The other item that had come up was the water line and the expense of, I think Ann had expressed a concern about fully removing that line. And I think that if I were you, I would request that it be decommissioned, and, however you can just cut the pipe, and not have to do a major excavation back to the road. And I'd be surprised if you really met much resistance from that. I think it'd be hard to come up with a reason why that, is a problem in my mind. I think, really they're just looking for you to, unfortunately, remove what you put there. And I do realize that that was time and expense from folks in town, and not what anybody wants to hear.
All right, time, expense, and a letter or email we received from DEC indicating that we didn't need a permit to go forward.
I think there's some, maybe some interpretation of like the level of.
The level, I get it.
The level of,
I
and you know
understand
how that
exactly what you're
goes.
saying.
And I think that, what I'm seeing is not inconsistent. I think that, that the town wanting to be a good role model for others, I think it's probably an opportunity to demonstrate that. The other option is to do an analysis of whether there is an alternative location. And if the town really can't come up with another location, there's always a discussion of an after-the-fact permit. I think the correspondence that I've read doesn't look like the state's too amenable to that, but that is usually the process that takes place if you really want to keep something, is to demonstrate that you couldn't put it somewhere else.
I know it's not your role, but I will tell you I've received many comments from people saying, how can the state give us a hard time over a little dog park when we have two huge salt sheds right on the river corridor, right around the block?
I was part of that too. So I understand that. I do understand that it's really, that's such an extreme, and the details about that puts it in this weird category. But if you can remove yourself from possible federal exemptions and all that business, and you just get back to, what folks are allowed to do, what other towns are allowed to do. I've been involved with other towns that have been trying to locate rec fields, and they haven't been allowed to do it. They haven't been allowed to go into their wetlands. And so it's really hard. What the Wetlands Office is really in a position of having to do is, if they let you keep it, justify to everyone else, why they can't do the same thing. And so there's.
Yeah, I get it. Does anyone on the board, or Joe, you want to jump in on anything?
I don't. You're not, the board's not under pressure tonight to make a decision, although I think you can kind of see the writing on the wall about maybe where the decision point will be this summer. But certainly here sometime soon, we're gonna have to come up with a plan. But again, having Dory here, in good faith, since we started working with Tina back in February or whenever that was, we've followed through on every step that we said that we were going to take with DEC. The last step being we were going to have an expert come in, do a delineation. Our expert said, you don't need to do a full delineation. We were going to report that in public. So in good faith, we're following through on what we told DEC we were going to do, exactly when and where. So, we're trying to keep up our side of the bargain.
And Dory, I really appreciate you being aware of town finances. For those of you who don't know, Dory is a select board chair also.
I am in Huntington.
So you're very familiar with it. Anybody have any comments, questions? We have a couple people from the dog park. We have Mr. Tabali, who donated the land to the dog park at its inception. Do you guys want to say something? Please just step up. Obviously, identify yourself for everyone. And,
Absolutely. Kay Boyce, Chair of the Dog Park Committee. First of all, I would like to thank you very much, Dory, for your very careful analysis of the land there. We were under the impression before this was even requested that it clearly was a Class 2 wetlands. I mean, looking at the maps that Dean had and all of that. So we were aware of that, but of course, there's always the chance that somebody made a mistake along the way. So now we have real confirmation that it truly is Class 2 wetlands. I think the thing that you might be able to help us with most, Dory, are some regulations, wetland regulations, specifically Wetland Regulations 6.09, which does allow for certain activities within a Class 2 wetlands, as well as within the buffer zone. And those activities are are allowed without a permit. And some of those activities include hunting, bird watching, hiking, trapping, horseback riding, snowshoeing, skiing, and quotes, similar outdoor recreational activities, similar. And so one might say, well, maybe you could look at a dog and say it's a smaller horse. And the dog owners actually clean up after their dogs, and if they don't, another kindly soul in the park does. We appreciate your comment about the trees. We have been extremely careful about only removing trees that are dead, dying, or dangerous. Our issue has always been safety within the dog park for all visitors. And so I guess that's the point that we think we would really appreciate some additional clarification, that if these other outdoor recreational activities are allowed, does a dog park fall under that category of similar outdoor recreational activities?
I don't want to put you on the spot, Dory. You're welcome to respond if you're prepared.
I'm happy to.
Oh, great, thanks.
The activities that are listed in the wetland rules as allowed uses, such as that you've mentioned, the bird watching, the hiking, those are allowed uses, but construction of trails to facilitate the walking would not be an allowed use. Horseback riding is an allowed use. You get into constructing buildings and cutting and filling in the wetland for associated needs of the horse fall out of the exemption. And so for the dog park, if you had, my understanding is that DEC at one point in time had suggested some sort of a fence would have been okay. And I think there may be some argument about what level of fencing is okay. And, I'll leave that as a legal argument, maybe. But let's all say we could have put some kind of a fence out there. And if you had just turned the dogs loose in there wouldn't have been an issue. Where the issue comes in is when you introduce the fill and the structures into the wetland area. And so they're not exempt. And so technically wood chips would fall out of the exemption. If you didn't have to put any wood chips in, and you didn't put any of the, is there a shed in there? There's a shed in there. And so the shed is not an exemption. So if you really look at the exemptions, it's for those activities that have very little to no impact on the resource that we're talking about. Once you start needing to clear and fill and manipulate to accommodate structures that are associated with your use, then your exemption falls away. And then you need to get the permits to do that kind of stuff. And so, but there are some structures that are allowed. Boardwalks that meet a BMP specification, best management practice, can be allowed in certain locations. You don't have a boardwalk out there, but it's just an example of, there are a few structures that, can fall in the exemption. But unfortunately, some of the features that were incorporated into the dog park kind of tipped the scale out of an allowed use into, you need to get a permit to do this. And it's not to say that permits haven't been issued for impacts to wetlands. One thing to keep in mind, I think, is the kind of the mitigation sequencing This is how they make a decision about whether they would give a permit or not. And it's really a three-step process. The first step is essentially avoidance. Is there somewhere else you could have put the project that you would have avoided the impact to the wetland? And so that's really what I was talking about earlier, is if you do a search and really Shelburne can't come up with anywhere else that, wouldn't have had as much wetland impact, then you go back to the discussion of this site and kind of say, well, this is all we have, there's nothing else available or that we can obtain. It's a hard test to pass, especially for a town and with a dog park. Instances that come to mind where people more easily pass that test is like a hospital that wants to add on, and I've had this, I'm speaking from a project that I have, a hospital that wants to add on an emergency room. Well, they can't, they have the campus, and the emergency rooms, make sense to be part of the campus. But where the only place they have to put it, there's a wetland impact. It's fairly easy to pass that test of, well, we can't really avoid because we have nowhere else to go. We got to put this here. Dog park, you fall into this category of, does it have to be in any particular place? So it's a more difficult use to justify that it had to be somewhere. So avoidance is the first step. If you can pass that test and saying, no, we couldn't avoid the wetland impacts completely, then your next step is to minimize the impacts. So what can you do as part of your use to have the least amount of impact on that resource? And that's where, you might get into, if you need a walkway, you might be looking at a walkway that has a permeable substrate so that the hydrology of the wetland isn't altered. What kind of fill did you use in the dog park? Not to say that wood chips are all that devastating to the environment, but it's counted as fill per the regulations. And then in the front, there's gravel as well, which would be more in the buffer towards the front of that facility, just outside the dog park. So, and then if you essentially, you pass avoidance and you do what you can to minimize, but you still have these impacts, then you might need to get into some sort of mitigation, which is where you offset for the effect that you're going to have. And that's really for bigger projects. I don't think that would really, in this case, the mitigation wouldn't be in the form of you like paying a fee into a conservation fund. It'd be more, okay, so what can we do? Can we do some planting somewhere to offset what you've done? And that's kind of the last tier, though. It takes a little bit of work to get to where they'll sign off on a mitigation. Because that's where they've basically concluded, all right, we're going to go along with this project. You've demonstrated it's got to be where it is. You've done everything you can to minimize your impacts, but you still have some. So what are we going to do to, to offset that?
Thanks, Dory. Fred, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I do.
This is Fred Tabali. I'll give you another chance. Fred was the gentleman who owns the land right next to the dog park and gave the town this land at no cost. So, although there's a revision provision, I believe. But go ahead.
Hello? Okay. Yes, I'm not sure what my position is here tonight, but I guess I ought to put the town on notice. I, of course, disagree with, not that it's not a wetland. I told you last time I was here, there was no reason to get a consultant in to do a delineation because it was pretty clear that and the rest of the 170 acres that was in that parcel, there was a lot of wetlands that we knew that area was on the maps, class 2. While I own the property, there's never been a dog park there. And so if, in fact, you are considering acceding to the wetlands rules that they say are applicable, one, the town, of course, is obligated to deed back the property because it requires a dog park. Second, the reason that the dog park is there is that the town was able to build a parking lot to service the dog park off the property that we were giving to the town. We, in fact, wanted the parking lot on next to the dog park, they said that would be, you know, hard surface, concrete or gravel, whatever, so we didn't do it, but the town was able to give us access to the parking lot by the sewer plant.
Which took place a couple of years later. It didn't happen at the same time, because I remember when this first came about, which was about 7 or so years ago. And the parking lot was something we did a couple of years later when we had allocated the budgetary funds to do that.
Yes, that is correct, but it was, when we were talking to the town before we gave them the property, they said, well, we'll see if we can get a parking lot, as we have the property to do that in a reasonable rate. Just so you have some information that the reason also it is there is because of Shelburne Farms. During a good portion of the year, Shelburne Farms does not allow dogs on their property. And as they maintain that it would be beneficial to them if they had a dog park where they could say their visitors, you could take the dog down a mile down the road and let the dogs exercise, put them back, whatever. But it was at least an amenity and less problems with Shelburne Farms. And of course, that is an economic benefit to the town as well as a wonderful place. More importantly, and I never thought of this before, but if in fact the dog park is moved and you have to revert the title to either me or the corporation, then I think the town in good faith also is obligated to return all the donations that have been made to the town in the name of the dog park, not other general donations, which may be $50,000. I know I did part of that, but so because it was the town who had the obligation to get the permit, if a permit was required. I don't disagree that there's some interpretational questions, but there are cases in Vermont which in fact allow ancillary uses to an allowed use. And the allowed use in the statutes says if it's an allowed use, you do not have to apply for a permit. You may build in that wetland, or not build. You may use the outdoor recreational activity and proceed. There's all kinds of other legal arguments. It's not worth going into it at the moment. But I do want to put you at least of the record that there's potentially $50,000 more of donations that were given because that dog park was going to be there. Maybe somebody else could make it up. So,
Okay, well, of
Thank
course, I'm sure you understand, Fred, I think you refer to yourself as a recovering attorney, right?
yes,
We will not, and I encourage the rest of the board not to make any statements in regard to whether the town is obligated to come up with $50,000, nor make any comment as to the accuracy of that number. This is the
I
first
can't.
time I've even heard of it.
Well, I never thought of it over here last time, and I'm not really representing that the number is $50,000. We have to go to the town's records because we always deposited the money into the town's account.
Yeah,
In the-
I would question even the veracity of, not the veracity, but the
amount.
whether the town would be obligated to do that.
Of course.
Yeah. But thank you for the comments. Kate, you have another comment, or?
Just
Thank
one more very, very brief comment. Over the last several years, the Dog Park Committee has been extremely careful about placing structures on the land. So for example, the shed that is inside the dog park and was an Eagle Scout project was permitted by the town, but that rests on top of the soil, so there is no structure underneath. There was no pouring of any cement. The benches that we have in the dog park as well were just placed on top of the soil. The whole idea being, of course, to allow for the full flow of water. The gravel in the front could certainly be removed. It is a permeable surface, however, so we did not do any digging with one exception. There are 3 posts that are dug inside the dog park that hold the plastic bags for animal waste. And those posts are similar to ones, of course, that you see along the Ty Hall Trail and other places. So we did make efforts under the direction of the town to make certain that we were not impacting, that the flow of water and the land itself. We are very interested in moving forward and having more of a conversation with the state of Vermont. We're very invested in seeing what we can possibly do to maintain the park where it is. And so we would encourage that continuing conversation.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kate. I want to give everybody on the board a chance to weigh in, make a comment, or anything? Nothing? The town's in a tough position. We're in a tough position. We went forward with a dog park in this location. We reached out to the Department of Environmental Conservation before we did it. Fred Tabali's a good guy. He gave the town this land. I do understand what Dory was referring to. There's a question, after we received a representation from DEC that we didn't need a permit to go forward with the dog park in this area. There is the question and the interpretation, I believe you referred to as, Tori, is did we, as a town, go too far beyond what was expected as a dog park? Did we set up any trails within there? We put a shed, a very small shed, nothing like the salt sheds, but we put a very small shed into that area that does not go down into the ground. And we have some wood chips. We do have a water pipe that goes in so the dogs can get some water. This is obviously a very minor intrusion upon a wetland as compared to other intrusions within Shelburne. But we're in a tough position because we're not the judge,
So I certainly think if you continue conversations with DEC.
Could you just use the mic, Dory? Thank you.
I certainly encourage you to continue the conversations with DEC. I'm obviously getting more background tonight about the investment. It's probably good that I don't know that when I go out initially, and I can just give you, this is what you have, and this is what I've seen, and this is, what I think from my years of doing this is reasonable, and from the Wetlands Office perspective. Every situation has its unique characteristics, and clearly this one has some extenuating circumstances that are difficult to do, to say the least. I think I would be prepared in those conversations to hear that maybe you did go too far, and what is currently out there was not what was contemplated as an allowed use, and that what you've done really wouldn't have passed these tests that I talked about before. You may be given, you may have the opportunity to scale back. Your shed is movable. You've got these features. I don't know that you want your shed moved, but, these are the kinds of things that DEC make, if you really put forth this, okay, we want to keep the dog park, what can we have? Be prepared to hear that a lot of what you've invested in there may have to go. And that, and that may not be acceptable either. That may not be what anyone contemplated. That
One of our problems, Dory, is the dog park has turned out to be a wonderful resource for the town.
Yep.
We have a dog park now. To move the dog park is not as easy as it seems, because it's very hard to get a private citizen to be willing to turn over land to the town to use. And we're not in a position to buy land for this, so we would have to find town land that would be acceptable, and that poses problems unto itself. And so I can see why our dog park committee and why I, myself personally, am struggling with, we don't want to give up this dog park if we don't have another place to go. We might not have another viable place to go.
Yep.
And that's the issue. Is that fair, Kate and Rosalind? Is that?
It's very fair, and we can remove the shed, we can remove those benches, the only thing we really need to do is to be able to cut away vegetation inside the park so that it doesn't create such a barrier for the dogs that they can't run around, that they'll be crashing into things, just removing certain vegetation and again, cutting down dead, dying, and dangerous trees. I mean, we can minimize any of the things within the dog park, move those things out, and we'd love to continue the conversation.
And there's no way that I can give you any guarantee
Right.
that
And we get
DEC
it.
is going to buy into that.
Yeah, I get it.
I hear you, and I think that, from the correspondence that I've been provided, I think you still have room for dialogue with the DEC. I just caution, and I don't know how much I'll be involved with this, I just caution you to kind of watch the tone.
Right.
And as soon as you see it kind of shifting towards, we might get issued a formal violation here, and do we really want that?
No, we don't want that.
Right, so that's the only thing, I just, I caution you with, just kind of feel the water as you go, no pun intended there, but.
All right, well, thank you. This is not a decision item tonight for any of us, so I thank you, Kate and Rosalind and other people on the dog park. Please continue to talk with Joe. Fred, thank you very much for your interest. We're doing everything we can, Okay, so let's move on to the next item on our agenda. Thank you, Dory, you're great. Consider approving a liquor license for the Quinny Club. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding, so I ask everyone on the board, does anyone have a conflict of interest in regard to this?
No.
I will disclose that I've known Steve ever since I took a series of golf lessons from him about 9 years ago, and obviously it didn't help much. So, Joe, why don't you talk about this a little bit?
I can briefly. Steve met with me and Kate and Dean a week or two ago, and I don't know if the board is, I guess everyone on the board realizes that this is a different piece of property and a different business altogether than the Quinnipiac Golf Course. This is just the driving range portion. I think maybe that's a little confusing. And I think we talked briefly about what his zoning approval allows relative to what he's asking the select board in terms of a liquor license. And at least with our conversation, my feeling was that, and the planning and zoning department's feeling is that, assuming he's going to do what he's told me he was going to do, he's in the good graces of the town as far as compliance in that regard.
I will tell everybody, if you don't know, Steve grew up in Shelburne. He started a kids program for golf that has been highly successful, and we've been fortunate that he's moved it to Shelburne to provide opportunities for a lot of kids to learn golf and get frustrated along with John and me. So with that, does anyone want to make a motion approving the Quinny Club for a first-class liquor license and outdoor consumption permit?
And sorry, Gary, I think Steve came here because, did you want to talk about your operation at all?
I can.
I didn't know if you
I don't
wanted
need
to.
to. If you want
Okay.
me to,
Oh,
I can
okay.
say so.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, but.
Okay.
That's
I'd
fine.
appreciate that because I don't have a clue.
Sure.
Oh.
Sure. Want me to go in front of the mic?
Sure, please, and This is Steve Gonzalez.
Yeah, hi. So Steve Gonzalez. So I'm a PJ professional. Grew up in Shelburne 50 years ago. And so I've been teaching golf for 30 years. And I also own Gonzo's Indoor Golf in South Burlington. So I purchased the Quinny driving range over the winter. 100% of people that go to the driving range, they're there to hit balls. I have 6 golf professionals, PGA professionals that teach with me. We have over 150 kids. We got a big structure, a 40 by 40 tent. We have a couple ping pong tables under there, so during our snack break, the kids can come and play ping pong or shoot pool or do stuff like that. That's pretty much it. The golf course is right next to the property, so I do playing lessons and stuff, and that's pretty much it. You know, people come, and on a hot, sticky summer day, if after they hit golf balls, or you know, they want to get a cold Coke or a snack or whatever they want to do, they can go into the tent or go wherever and do that. But that's my business, and I really enjoy what I do, and I've been doing it for a long time. Yeah, so that's the Quinny Club. I rebranded it the Quinny Club. It's still the Quinny driving range, but that's what I do. Yeah. So
I'm a little curious about the admixture of kids and liquor license.
Sure. Well, let's say a family of 6 comes, and the mom and dad are hitting balls, and the kids are, and basically on a hot, sticky day, I mean, if the dad wants to have something to drink, there's more than just a bottle of water. That's not all I do. I mean, out of the 10,000 people that go there, 150 of them are kids. You know, if we have 100 people hitting golf balls on the range in the summer, there might be 10 kids there, and the other 90 people are adults. It's not, you know, a romper room kids camp every day. It's for 2.5 months, but the season's about 9 months. So.
And as a parent of a 4 and a 7-year-old that goes to Zachary's and Pizza Putt and Basin Harbor and a lot of places where I'm with my kids all day, I really appreciate the fact that you're offering to a glass of wine. That sounds great.
When I have nothing against the ladies, but when I have when I do a ladies beginner clinic or a men's beginner clinic, and we're all struggling to get the ball up in the air, I think I might want to have a glass of something. Yeah. So there you go. So that's you got it.
All right.
Good, Gary?
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Would someone like to make a motion?
Move to approve the Quinny Club for a first-class liquor license and outdoor consumption permit.
Moved by Colleen. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by John, a second before Jerry. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
You're approved, Steve.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
For coming.
All right, next item up is, we have Chris Robinson and Peter Frankenberg to talk about our wastewater budget and rates. Turn it right over to them, Joe? Or do you want to do any intro?
I mean, you know, the board, this is a decision item tonight. The budget's been modified a little bit from the initial one that you saw last week, although nothing no seismic changes. Like I said, it's a decision item. However, if you don't feel comfortable passing it, you know, this could go off for another week. But in my opinion, if you are ready, it'd be nice to get on with other business first, town staff.
Thanks. All right, Chris, all yours. And Peter.
Just a summary, because this is the third meeting that we have had the budget on the agenda. So just to kind of go through some of the high points. So this budget that you have in front of you, we've got extra copies here if anyone would like to have one. Total expenses, $1.9 million. That's a 2.5% increase from the current budget year that we're at. The rate that we are proposing in this budget to support that is $13.15 per 1,000 gallons. That's a 31-cent increase, or 2.4% from the current rate. And the impact on a user that would have, say, a typical family, 70,000 gallons a year, would be about an increase of $22 to a total bill for wastewater of $920 per year, or a smaller household, $7 increase, or about $260 per year for that. Just looking at the expenses, our biggest expense, as you know, is the debt service. That's coming from the plants that were upgraded back around 2000. We're still paying the debt service for that, but we did a lot of work on the collection system, pump stations, really rehabbing the whole system. So those loans will be going for probably another 5 to 10 years before those are completed. Salaries and benefits, with 2 plants, we have staff at both places. We have 5 full-time staff that operate the plants, and salaries and benefits are obviously a big piece of the budget. And then the other parts of the budget, operating and maintenance, when the plant operates 24/7 in severe conditions, obviously there's a lot of maintenance work that has to go on there with Chris and his staff. Try to do capital improvements each year, again, to avoid, a large bond issue where you have to replace a lot of things all at once. Utilities, our biggest utility cost is electricity. Again, the staff is working as best as they can to minimize that cost with energy efficient improvements, taking advantage of those wherever they can, and sludge disposal. So those are just the main categories that we have of the budget. In terms of this version, the expense increases, chemical costs, most of that is just simply a matter of the unit cost of the chemicals increasing, and also the level that we're using to try to treat the effluent and the sludge as best as possible to meet state specs and to basically stay within with our permitting requirements. Again, salaries and benefits being a big part of the budget. Again, just the increase of cost of living and the benefits that go along with it. We are looking at a first phase of a department reorganization, which Chris and I can talk about in a later slide. Property and casualty insurance, we saw that with the general fund. That went up, and again, that's impacting the budget here, just in terms of the rates that we're being charged. Capital projects planned in this budget, the primary one for the medium-sized projects outside of the bond issue that was passed would be to rehab the Bay Colony pump station. Again, Chris has been rotating around the different stations, trying to bring them up to standards, up to spec, so that station is slated to be improved in this budget. And project engineering, again, this is something Chris has touched on in the past, a couple things he's looking at there. Again, the reason our rates are so high is because we have 2 treatment plants, operating 2 and spreading them largely over a residential profile. We don't have a lot of large users, although certainly I think of note, we have had some good commercial load. The Shelburne Green project, Fiddlehead Brewery, NPC up off Executive Drive, so we have had some good commercial load coming in recent years, but we're still, with 2 plants, spreading our costs over that kind of an operating profile. So one thought that Chris is looking at is, would it make sense at some point to look at consolidating the 2? Is that even feasible? At least looking at it to try to figure out if that's something that we should even be considering. So there's money in there for a consultant to look at that study, at least on a preliminary basis. And also, Chris has an asset management program. Again, if you've been through the plants, you know how much equipment is in there, how it operates 24/7, and you have to plan to replace it. You don't want to be in a situation where it fails and now you're scrambling to get a replacement part or something. So Chris is working on an asset management program so he can have a rotation of equipment and not have to be reactionary when the equipment fails, but to have a plan in place before it reaches its end of life so that you can replace it. That's another factor in the budget. Expense decreases, again, the department I think works pretty hard to try to minimize their costs wherever they can. There were some, one of the items that was lower in this year's budget than the current year was some equipment purchases and maintenance. There was some SCADA equipment that was replaced in this budget year that won't be replaced next year. That's a reduction. And again, just looking at wherever we can save on operating expenses. Sludge disposal is down $10,000. Again, I think that's a tribute to the staff working with treating the sludge as efficiently as possible to get the lowest possible, or get the highest quality sludge when it goes to Chittenden Solid Waste, and the cost is affected by that. So it's not just running the process, but looking how you can do it as efficiently as possible and get the best cost or lower the cost of the disposal. Again, electricities, other than electric, we were fortunate to see a lowering of natural gas prices, so that was an improvement. And also, again, the staff is looking at wherever possible, doing with more, putting in more efficient equipment wherever. I mentioned the staff reconfiguration, and Chris can talk more about this, but currently we have 5 staff. We're not adding any in this new budget. The job changes, there are some job changes that we are proposing though. Currently, Chris is the superintendent and we have 1 assistant operator, is that right?
We have 1 assistant chief operator, and everyone else is designated as an operator. And what we're planning on doing is setting up chief operators, 1 at each facility. That's consistent with what's done at other municipalities that have multiple facilities. So we're just kind of finally falling into suit. And then we have 1 person who really is our chief mechanic. He's been the main go-to person with all of our mechanical issues. So we're recommending that he get a title of a chief mechanic.
And sorry if you don't mind, I mean, this again kind of goes in line with some of the succession planning and some of the reorg structure that we've been working on for over a year with the operation, the operation improvement plan, and also looking at Chris, his duties are starting to go from stormwater and wastewater, and that he really needs to be a manager and not necessarily day-to-day operations of the individual plants. So this really follows in line with what we've been talking about for over a year now.
And Chris has also done a fair amount of work looking at what competitive staff salaries and pay rates would be. Obviously, when you've got a good crew, which we think we have operating our plants, we want to stay in the market. And the budget reflects what Chris feels, I think, is necessary to keep those people. So the last thing just to touch on, even though it doesn't impact this version of the budget, but what's happening with the bond issue that was passed in 2015. The $3 million bond right now, we're looking at the design and probably going to construction within the next year for collection system improvements, force main replacements in several areas of the system. So it's really this first phase is looking at the collection system itself, the pump stations, not necessarily a lot of work at the plant itself, but the collection system that gets the sewage to the plants. So some force main replacements, again, where we've had some breakage in the past and trying to minimize that or to replace where the lines are aging. So between that and in these areas, also working with the Bay Road pump station whereby by permits you have to have storage capacity, either capacity on site or an emergency generator that can operate the plant in the event of a power failure. So looking at those as far as the first phase of the collection or the bond issue improvements. So about half of it, we're still in the final design phases, so we don't really have firm estimates yet, but we are expecting to finalize those probably within the next 6 months and go to construction within the next year or 2. Again, it doesn't affect this budget. The loan payments wouldn't start until 2 years after completion, so we're a couple of years away from when those will be hitting the budget. But what we're trying to do now is to get those projects in here, like pump station upgrades and things like that we can do within the working budget, because we are expecting an increase obviously when that debt service starts to come in. So maybe we can phase down on some of those projects to of the pump stations and those types of things in the operating budget to try to gradually move into the debt service payment that would be associated with this 1.5 million upgrade potentially. So that's really a quick summary. You've got the budget with the full details. Certainly, if you have any questions on those, you can let us know.
Well, does anyone have any questions or comments on this third time around?
It's a great job.
It's very, very thorough.
Yeah, I have to say, commend you on, keeping going on all this stuff, but I think probably people in the town certainly would like not to see an increase in sewer bill, and I think whatever we can do to follow along, if, consolidating the plan is gonna help, getting more commercial thing, I guess that fits with the economic development thing that we've talked about. And so pushing hard in that direction, I think, would be in everybody's best interest.
All right. You guys are ready to make a motion? Someone, Jerry, you want to make a motion?
Oh, I should. So moved.
Jerry, I heard him say that he moves to approve the fiscal year 2018 wastewater budget as presented tonight with a total budget of $1,901,970 and a rate of $13.15 per 1,000 gallons. Did I get that right, Jerry?
Absolutely. Couldn't have done it any better.
All right, moved by Jerry. Someone like to second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by John. Any further discussion? Aye. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Peter, Chris, and
appreciate it. And now we have
Chris again.
from Chris an update of our award-winning Shelburne South Burlington Inter-Municipal Stormwater contract, and it is award-winning, right?
It is, on a regional basis. I'm gonna make this really brief. I did give you a memo, just basically listing some of the tasks that we've been taking care of over the past year. And this is basically an update of where we are on a lot of things. Just to summarize, the relationship between South Burlington and Shelburne is excellent. The array of services that South Burlington is able to provide to us, I believe, is exceptional. They've done a fantastic job, way beyond what we could have done with the resources that we have here. We've got very tech-savvy people in that department that go out and do all their inspections on iPads, and everything is GPSed. So when they're doing outfall inspections, they're GPSing the locations. For instance, one of the things on here I've listed is they're actually locating a lot of our outfalls. When the outfalls were done at one point, they only did what was in the Monroe Brook watershed, but we have outfalls throughout the entire town. So they're continuing to go out there, and it's a step process. We can't do everything in 1 year, but we're continuing to add to the list of all of our outfalls. So they're able to GPS the location of that stuff. And then South Burlington also has other than the wonderful resource of Tom DePietro, we also have, a fantastic GIS person that works in South Burlington that is able to take all that information that's collected in the field and put it into some really remarkable maps and everything. So they've been fantastic. And I think the key thing about it is that they're a one-stop shop. It's nice because not only we get the services as far as street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, but we're getting the technical aspect of it. We're getting some plan reviews. When we have some really complicated plans that come in for developments, we're sending those off for Tom and his staff to look at, and they're coming back with comments. So there's a huge array of services that we're receiving from them that I think is fantastic. So that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you for the update. Does anyone have any comments? I know we're all pretty well familiar with this. Anyone? Does anyone here have any comments? Anybody from the library want to talk about our intermunicipal agreement with South Burlington?
So have you, just one question, have you seen or anticipated or anything with this relationship with South Burlington that's made you nervous at all?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. If anything, I'm talking to a lot of the other municipalities, trying to see if there's something as far as expanding the services. So,
Okay.
just because it is working very well for us.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. All right, let's turn to item number 14. Decision item, consider approving merger of Regional Stormwater Education Program and the Chittenden County Stream team. And this is where we're addressing MS4s and...
Correct. As a MS4 permit holder, we're required to meet 6 minimum measures just within the MS4. There's other stuff that's attached to it, but just the basic 6 minimum measures. Quite a while back, before my time with the stormwater stuff, when the MS4 holders in Chittenden County realized that this was going to be quite a burden, they decided, why don't we come together as a group and form these groups that dealt with the minimum measures. So for minimum measure 1, they started the RSEP program, the Regional Stormwater Education, and they also started for minimum measure number 2, the Chittenden County Stream team. We usually hold the meetings right after each other, and we're really finding it's gonna be beneficial just to bring it all to one. So what this is a merger that we actually wanted to take place last year, but the legislature had an intermunicipal agreement, stuff that they were working on, so we had to wait for the legislature to get done with that. Once they were done with that, we were able to give you the draft that the draft merger document. And at this point, we're just looking at
This will
trying
make
to
for
merge.
more efficiency and
It's for
controls,
efficiency.
and cost controls.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cost is, I think it was like $1,300 or $1,800 or something like that a year that would be saved, so.
I think every legislative body in Chittenden County has to approve this, correct?
Every MS4.
Yeah, every
And
MS4.
all
Okay, thank
the
you.
12 that are part of it. Yeah.
Correct.
All right, someone like to make a motion? To approve the merger of the Regional Stormwater Education Program and the Chittenden County Stream Team and authorize the town manager to sign the agreement on the behalf of the town of Shelburne. Moved by Jerry. Someone like to second? Seconded by Josh. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. All right, unanimous. Next item. Thank you again,
Thanks, Chris.
Next item is item 15. Consider approving a capital equipment note with the Bank of Middlebury in the amount of $6,000 for financing a wastewater truck purchased in 2014. Joe?
Yeah, real quick, I mean, this is a routine matter I think this board sees from time to time. Peter oftentimes, instead of taking out a 5-year note, finds it advantageous to do 1 year and keep rolling over, because obviously the interest rate's a little bit less. So Peter, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this particular one, or?
I think this originally was financing a $30,000 purchase, and now we're down to the last year. This will be the last time we're renewing it, and it'll be paid off at the conclusion of this loan, so.
Someone like to move to approve this capital equipment note as described?
So moved.
Moved by John, seconded by Josh. Hi, Ann. All in, any discussion? Hearing none? All in favor? Aye. Alice, how are you?
There's 3 loan documents to sign, please.
Alice is in the book, a book club with my wife. All right, item number 16. Consider authorizing the formation of an economic development working group. So Joe, you want to take this?
I can kick
puppy?
this out, and I'll start by saying I apologize to the board that Jerry and I did not have a chance to reconnect late last week or early this week. But coming out of the last week's meeting, it seemed like maybe this is a direction that the board was at least considering. I know that Jerry thought that this was something to pursue. Jerry, Dean, and I would say had a very lively and productive conversation about 2 weeks ago, probably the day after the meeting. And I think at least at that time, Jerry, it was thought that maybe you would head up some sort of working group to get something started. Now, again, we haven't had a chance to really reconnect in the last 2 weeks, so I'm not sure. I guess I'm looking at Jerry if your plan is to table this or if you want to try to move this forward tonight.
No, I don't think it would be useful to push it at this point. And probably would make more sense to give it some more thought.
Okay, so let's table it to a date uncertain
Yeah.
until you've had time to
It was a
have that
board,
meeting.
it was a retreat priority, a retreat that unfortunately I missed. And it's been difficult to understand how it could have been nominated to be such a priority without corresponding enthusiasm. So I'm not sure that this is I'm not really very sure about how to approach this at this point.
I think just add, the break after our thing, I think I managed to talk to Rosalind Clan, who's the head of the Shelburne business people. I just mentioned about this, that she would be aware. She thought it was a great idea, and she thought that their group would really appreciate and really had a lot, could offer input and thought the whole idea was well worth thinking about.
Yeah,
So
well, I'll
just-
tell you, I've rethought my original thoughts from, not my original thoughts, the discussion we had before, and I'm interested in trying to do something. I do think it makes sense for this initial conversation to take place, though.
I will say I've had a few conversations with people that I know in other towns like Charlotte and Essex and Essex Junction, and they're really pursuing this type of activity to generate, space utilization, create economic opportunities. There's a lot of small businesses starting on the UVM campus. They're looking for the next place to go. They can't afford to build a building or buy a building, but they could use, a room or something like that. So it seems to me that, and I agree, Jerry, this is not probably, without vetting it a little bit more, the place to try to describe what we're really doing. But it seems to me that we have an opportunity here, and I think it'd be good to do something with it, so.
Well, I think we're overwhelmed by opportunity. I think that's the problem. And I do feel in my past experience that it may not be terribly productive to try to confirm the precision of this effort before, in fact, you let the effort develop and grow in its own direction locally. I've been part of efforts that were hand-me-downs. I've been part of efforts that were homegrown entirely and tended to be repetitive and duplicative. But I've struggled with and Joe made a good point in our conversation that you recall I had an idea originally of a 3-person organizing committee. Joe made the very good point that subjects just the organization of a committee to potentially open meeting law, which really complicates just simply the logistics of getting people together who are at that point just trying to organize a committee, much less be one. And but I feel that this is an opportunity that we just can't miss. And I'm with some regret, I say that I would have preferred to have come tonight with the proposal so fleshed out that it would be acceptable and that we could move along, although the pace is going to be extremely measured and not expensive, except in dedicated people's time.
I think I can do all I can to work with Jerry between now and June 13th to have something
That'd be great.
sussed out for the board.
Okay,
We'll do our best.
great. Unless anyone has anything else? Anybody else have anything on this? No, I'm guessing you guys are waiting for this item, which is item number 17, discuss the library building project in advance of what's written on the agenda as a June 13th decision. So, we have the library committee here, we have a majority of the steering committee. Does anybody want to call to order some meetings?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the steering committee to order because we have, I think, about the entire committee here for concurrent meeting with you guys. Thank you for putting us on your agenda again. This was as a discussion item to see after the presentation we had 2 weeks ago by Michael Mosier, which gave you the survey results of that survey they went out to every registered voter in Shelburne. If after thinking about that for a couple weeks, if you had any discussion you'd like to do or any questions, Colleen, did you have anything you wanted to say to your fellow committee members?
Well, just that in the last 2 weeks, we've had another library steering committee meeting. There was a board of trustees meeting, which I attended specifically to talk about this particular project. And in addition to discussing this, I mean, this is the time where we've had many hours of meetings between the library steering committee, the board of trustees. This has been in front of the select board on various levels. over the last 3 years, including being made a top priority at the retreat for the last 2 years. And we've come to the point where, okay, now we need to make a decision and to move forward. And I think everybody that is involved realizes that something needs to be done. It's just a matter of what and when. And I know that you saw that probably in the annotated agenda, specifically what the questions are. And we can discuss further what the steering committee recommends. Do you want to take it from there?
Sure. And in case you guys are interested, you know that it rained yesterday, right? So I took a video of the water coming in the library. I know you two have been there to see it. The first time I met you, actually, it was happening. So yeah, it's definitely something that it's an issue that we face daily every time it rains. And so it is definitely an issue if we need to do something, and what we do, I think we need to decide together. But the steering committee had the architects with us last time we met, and they were presenting to us a study that they had done that Efficiency Vermont had paid for, that looked at high energy efficient fixtures in the building and a highly energy efficient envelope for the building, which had been already built into the budget that's been presented to you, and how much that would save the town from day one if we were to go with this new building. But they also talked with us about construction timelines, because we were talking about, well, if we were to consider a bond, when should we consider having it if we want to keep prices as low as possible? And so we were talking about November versus March, and the advantages to November and the possible advantages to March, but also the possible disadvantages of a delay in terms of construction cost and construction planning. So the committee came up with a recommendation to the trustees and to the select board to consider the original budget for the entire project, which includes a new library, it includes much needed renovations to the historic town hall, it includes safety improvements to the parking lot, it includes moving that parking entryway to make it safer for the fire station. And so that whole budget, which was presented to you several months ago from Andrea at Vermont Integrated Architecture, was a $6.5 million bond idea. Andrea talked with Joe recently, and she said we could probably bring that down to 6. Also keeping in mind that there are folks in town who are interested in helping out, but wanted to see a strong commitment from the town money-wise before they would consider helping out monetarily. So it's another thing to keep in mind. But we felt like the mission that was given to us when we started was to solve the space maintenance issues of the library and the town. And that's what we felt like through careful consideration with the public, we've come up with this plan. And so our recommendation is to go with that if you're willing.
All right, does anyone on the board have anything they'd like to say?
Yeah, I just have some questions. I mean, it's not often you get the kind of data that we got from this survey that, would inform that our decision would, you don't see. So it's kind of hard to say no, it sort of confirms that there is a great support for this. I guess my questions were more, and I hadn't looked at it last time, about the comments that, obviously you can fit them into lots of different categories. A lot of people don't, are concerned about rising taxes, which is always a reasonable concern. But I guess the two things that I thought were that were repeated, and I didn't know if you'd talked about this and where you lean, is the whole idea of, separating out the library from the town hall issues, and how does that, and I think there was also a couple of things of separating the function of the library separate from the town. I think those are the two things that I took out of these things.
Absolutely. And to give you some context for those comments, Michael mentioned that he didn't include a lot of comments that were such like, I fully support this project, because that was a repetition of how they voted. So he just put in unique comments that happened to come out. And as a committee, we really felt like the comments revealed to us the further education we need to do. Because many people seem to think that what we're doing is building a $6.5 million library, which is not what we're proposing. And that they want to make sure that in whatever bond that might go out there, we very clearly articulate the different parts of the project and maybe which if we were to split up, people would know how much is going to the library, how much is going to other things, so people could really understand what the project entails. Yeah, and I think those comments point that out, that people really want to be able to figure out how much goes to what. Which was not clearly split up in the materials they received.
Anyone else on the board?
Yeah, it seems to me we've got several levels of consideration, and I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the 13th, but to make this useful, it's, in my view, the demonstrated support for a new library project just about assures, or I think should, board support for presenting the idea and its financing to the town. I'm not sure how you would not present it to the town, given that support. That leads to the question of when best to do it, whether in November or at the time of town meeting. I recognize the pros and cons of each. It seems to me, maybe anticipating some of the discussion at the next meeting, and if I'm transgressing on that, just tell me. But it seems to me that November might make the most sense in balance. The second comment is, I think there remains a need to articulate the town hall project, call it, as an essential part of the library project, so that we're not running a risk that they're competing. They're going to compete on cost, whatever you do. Whatever portion of the 6 million is town hall is going to be a competitor, just simply because it's less money, and it would mean less expenditure and less tax, less impact. But I think we have an opportunity to communicate, even to the extent of holding one of our board meetings in the town hall, that venue and that facility is more important than simply a structural addition or something to be better incorporated or something to stop the leaking in. It's really an integral part of that project. Because I'm not sure it's going to be helpful down the road to see competing ideas, as if in fact they were. And it doesn't seem to me personally that they are. So I'd be very supportive of continued development of really imaginative educational outreach, which on the basis that take nothing for granted, and certainly not information even for those of us who pass it every single day, and even for those of us who I remember famously at one meeting, it's the only meeting I've ever been to that broke up because everybody had to go get rags. You remember? So I'd be very supportive of that kind of continued outreach, given the amount of time, which is a real bonus here in advance of a potential vote.
Thank you. John and Colleen?
Well, I think that it was a very clear recommendation, and having attended the Board of Trustees meeting, it was very clear that the Board of Trustees was in support of, what was it, 4.5? That was.
It's 4.3 for the library part.
4.3 for the library, and then whatever the town in support, or in recommendation of the steering committee, supported for the town hall. And Jerry, I absolutely agree with you. I think that this began in its inception as a combined project, that this was like a town center project, not just a library. And they're they're connected at this point, and to try and remove it and not do anything to the town hall would be a disservice to the entire town. So my recommendation on what should be a decision item on the next agenda is to put this on for a bond in November. And that's what I think we would vote on June 13th. And am I assuming that what you were trying to get a feel of the board in that direction?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
exactly the type of conversation I wanted to kind of get out of the board for the, paper report on, and also so we know maybe what to expect from the conversation in 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, let me tell you what I'd be interested for the June 13th meeting. I'd be interested, you mentioned the fire department, safety concerns. I'd be interested in hearing from the fire department. If we're going to impact fire department access, I'd want the fire department input. So I would expect, in order to, if you're proposing a project that's going to impact them, I would expect that they are supportive of it, and I would want to hear that on June 13th.
And they were involved.
Okay.
Just to clarify,
Good.
yeah,
So
at the beginning.
I just would
Yeah.
love if you could get the chief or some indication. I'd also would like to have an update from you, Joe, by June 13th about the Bay Road Bridge. We have been told for many years that this is a cost that the town is going to have to bear. We have now moved up the ladder for the state priorities. However, we don't have any indication, as far as I know, that the state is willing to pay for this. So if we're going to have a bond for any amount of money for the library, I think it is appropriate for residents to be aware, will Bay Road Bridge also be on? Or will it not be on? Or will the state be paying for it? And we have had some discussions from a resident who has suggested an alternative method of dealing with it. And I would expect that if we're going to go forward on June 13th, that's been vetted in some way. I'm looking for the information so we can make a decision that's based on facts. I think the survey is important, and I agree with Jerry. The survey shows that there is support for the project. So, yeah, I think it should be discussed. And I have heard the discussions about November versus March. I will say that my general feeling is it's inappropriate to have bond votes on November. I believe they should be part of the town meeting process. And I do understand that there are exceptions to that rule for emergency situations. I do think it's important to note that as soon as a bond is out, when you're talking about cost savings, bids are coming in at the bond amount. Every person out there is going to know what the bond is. Yeah, so I don't necessarily feel that's a strong argument for November versus March as a cost savings. So I'm just looking for that information on June 13th so we can go forward. I will tell you, at this stage, I'm supportive of putting it on for bond. So you don't have to worry about me on that. I'm supportive of that. I would take a lot of persuasion for me to think it's appropriate to put it to November. It would, having complete information about the Bay Road Bridge by June 13th would go a long way in that regard, but I don't know if that's possible. And having complete agreement on the fire department or any other group that should be involved in town hall renovations, and I'm assuming that the steering committee already involved those people, historic preservation and that. I would love for them to come in and say, yeah, we're supportive of this. You know, I want to get the community behind it. For this to pass, the question is not putting it on the bond. The question is, only put it on the bond if we think it's gonna pass. So let's get the whole community to work together. Answer these questions, provide everyone the facts, and then, put it up for a vote. And with people understanding what the competing priorities are. I
And
think that's only
luckily-
fair.
And luckily, Gary, I think Laura has done such an amazing job over the last 3 years of laying a lot of that groundwork. And so I feel pretty grateful of the position that we're in, that we don't have to sit back and at this stage of the game say, oh shoot, we never did consult that group. They've been in, there's a mosquito. We have been in consult with them and many groups in town that we could think of. And that was one of the benefits of not just involving town committees, boards, and departments right from the very beginning, but also involving the town, or involving the public right from the very beginning with charrettes and the Shelburne outside market, and in doing that and trying to keep these lines of communication open. So I
And
think
I agree with
we're
you.
in a pretty good
It's
position.
been real good. I'm a little confused and would like some clarification on June 13th. Why this would be a decision item for June 13th, even if it were for November, because usually bond votes by select board are done according to the time schedule. You have so many days before the bond in order to determine whether to put it on for a vote, so you can have the most up-to-date information. So this is coming a couple months earlier than what would be normal. So I think,
Presumably, we repeat that, I mean, at the appropriate time, right?
Well, I think one of the reasons was, so if we knew that it was gonna be on for a bond in November, we had the summer in order to, increase our outreach. And we can say this is on for a bond vote in November. It gives us time we can use that summertime.
and I would
to use
ask,
that.
Joe, that before June 13th, since this is, I believe, the largest single bond item from the municipal standpoint in my 9 years on the board, I would expect it to have a outreach notice to the town greater than anything we've had before June 13th. So people know this is the largest item we've had. So they can come and they can stand up and say, yeah, we need to do this for this reason, this reason, this reason. We should do it in November, we should do it in March, or they should say, no, we shouldn't do this, or whatever they want to say. We need to give them the opportunity to do so, and so the notice has to be the greatest it's ever been. It's the biggest item ever. I think that's fair.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's fair.
Okay, that's well put.
And I also think on the agenda item, we should give it an appropriate amount of time. You know, this is not a 15-minute item. We need to be prepared for, if we have 3 minutes per person giving comments and we have 20 people and they average 2 minutes, that's 40 minutes without the presentation, without select board comments. So this is probably an hour agenda item. I would think. What do you guys think? I'm asking for your advice
No,
on
I
this.
agree. I think you make very good points,
I
yeah.
would say even an hour, 15 minutes, that's probably.
What do you think, Joe?
I agree. I think it'll be at least a 45-minute agenda.
I just want to be open and transparent, and I say I commend the steering committee and these people who have worked so hard for so many years. And look, we wanted this to be private donations. Everybody wanted it. It didn't work. It didn't work. So then you guys have gone out and worked your tails off to demonstrate that there is resident support for a bond vote. That is strong evidence, as Jerry articulated, for this board to put it on for a bond vote. That's not strong evidence that it should be in March or in November, but that it should be on. So those are my thoughts. If anyone here has anything they'd like to hear on June 13th, I urge you to let these people know now so they can be prepared.
Agreed.
I've let them know what I would like to hear, and I think everything I said was fair. You know, the information I want. And you already know, I'm in favor of putting it on for bond vote now,
Yeah. I
because
think,
Alice told me I should.
I think the only other thing that I would, as you mentioned, is some indication of if there are what extent firebed funding would be available to help with financing of the project.
Does anyone here, was anyone like to say something? You all guys have done so much for our community. I want to give you a chance to talk, and I hope you all decide to participate on June 13th, because let me tell you, when you sit up here and you get a lot of people say things, it puts a lot of pressure on you. It does. Anyone like to say something? Alice Wynn, former select board member.
I think it's just taking off sort of on what you said about getting as much information out to the public as possible. Because one of the things I think that we're concerned about is that we don't lose momentum. And I think that was also one reason why perhaps we thought November would be the better date for the bond.
I'll tell you, for the November date, just so you're not surprised by my thoughts, if I think we are not getting someone else to pay for the bridge, and that this alternative that a resident suggested to the town manager that would lower the cost by 90% or some huge amount is not really viable, and we need a new bridge, then I think they should be on together. I really think the residents have the right to make their own choices for priorities.
Well, the good thing is, it sounds like it's going to be early in the meeting. So bless you for remaining here at this hour.
Yeah. All right, anyone else want to say anything else? I just want to say thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks to you all, too. I like your process.
Thanks, Alan. All right, next item. Having the library committee pay for beers at the Bearded Frog. Oh, sorry, that wasn't really on the agenda. It should have been, but it wasn't. All right, I'd entertain a motion that we find that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the select board at a substantial disadvantage in regard to negotiations between the town of Shelburne and the New England Benevolent Police Association, and in regard to the litigation involving the Shelburne shipyard. We can make both those findings together, as both involve legal strategy and employment negotiations, labor negotiations. Moved by Jerry. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next, did you guys both sign this? There you go, Joe. Next. Entertain a motion entering executive session and inviting the town manager to discuss negotiations between the town of Shelburne and the New England Benevolent Police Association and the litigation with the Shelburne shipyard.
So moved.
Moved by Colleen, seconded.
Second.
Jerry? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Peter, for that budget presentation.
You know, we're done. Crank her down.
That was a good 1967 picture of Paul.
Oh, that picture was awesome.